let the post-mortems begin. This is Ireland's Rugby World Cup report card following, yes, another quarter-final exit. But I don't just want to talk about only the Rugby World Cup campaign, although that forms a significant part of this. I'm going to look at the build-up to the World Cup itself and then what lays next for each of the countries. First up, Ireland. Let's rip the plaster off, Irish fans, and get this one done. And videos will be coming in the channel very soon for all of the other big nations. So please, if you haven't already, I would love it if you'd hit subscribe on the channel. One thing that doesn't cost you anything, which helps spread the word, is just giving the video a thumbs up. It's just me. I'm Tim. This is Egg Chasers. I'm up against all those big corporate entities with all their big marketing budgets. I've got none of that. I've just got you to spread the word. And while you're there, leave your comments in the comments section. I'll be down there with you very soon to have a chat about Ireland, who, yes, heartbreaking defeat in a quarter-final in the Rugby World Cup. But, and this is where I want to start with them, this is a team that have done absolutely everything right, and that should not be lost in the wake of the Rugby World Cup 2023. And believe me, as an England fan who had to put up with Eddie Jones going, judge me on the World Cup, mate. It's all about the World Cup, mate. No, it's not all about the World Cup. And Irish fans know that. They've had an incredible ride with this team over the last few years, beating everybody, establishing themselves as one of the best in the world, world number one for a significant period, Grand Slams, first ever wins on New Zealand soil, series victory there as well. They've established an identity and a style of play that's been a joy to watch. They've had a settled team, developed some world-class talents, and things are looking very good for the future. But ultimately, yes, it cannot be avoided. Devastating defeat in another quarter-final, which is a failure by their own metrics. However, and it's there's a basketball player for the Milwaukee Bucks. They got knocked out in the playoffs recently. Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think his name is. I think I've got that name right. Anyway, there's an amazing video that's doing the rounds online of him being asked, is this season a failure, when his team got knocked out in the playoffs? And he pointed out Michael Jordan played for 15 seasons and won 6 titles. So does that mean the 9 years that he didn't win were a failure? Of course not. Only one team can win, and you're building all the time, and it's always steps. And that is the brutal reality of sport. But it doesn't mean if you don't achieve the ultimate goal that you can describe it as a failure. And one thing that definitely didn't happen with Ireland in this World Cup is they did not choke. What we just saw were the margins at the top of elite sport are paper thin. And Ireland were maybe 1% or 2% off their game, and New Zealand raised their games to levels we hadn't seen in the run-up to it. And that was enough to see them through to the semi-final and ultimately the final as well. And that could so easily have been Ireland, which actually makes it, I'm sure, the hardest pill to swallow out of all of the quarter-final exits. And Irish fans of a certain age have seen a few, let's be honest. One thing I will say is all the talk of the draw at this Rugby World Cup should probably end. And to be fair, I'm not accusing anyone of going on about it, but if you talk about the World Cup draw now and it being unfair and lopsided and stuff, which of course it was. I mean, firstly, that it actually made for an incredible Rugby World Cup. Just if you stand back objectively, the spectacle was better because of the lopsided draw. We got some amazing pool games, and 7 out of the 8 knockout fixtures were absolutely dynamite, went down to the final play. And that's never happened before and probably won't ever happen again. So I'm grateful that there was a lopsided draw. And also, and this is the more important point, Andy Farrell and his players, Johnny Sexton certainly, will not be sitting there moaning about the World Cup draw, because if you moan about the draw, that means what you're saying is we would have been happy to have got to a semi-final. That is not where this Ireland team were going into the Rugby World Cup. They were there to win, and they fell short of that ultimate goal. Now, when I look back, I think back to that game against South Africa in the pool stages, and here is where I think maybe we could see the lessons to learn for the future. And hey, hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it? It's very easy to Monday morning quarterback it after the fact. However, I was there in Paris on that night, and by the way, the most incredible atmosphere I've ever experienced at any sporting occasion. It was, I had goosebumps. You can go back and see the video on the channel of me reviewing the game on the full-time whistle, and I was absolutely just blown away by the spectacle that had been created by those two teams going toe-to-toe. A fantastic Irish team getting a win, and the fans. Must have been 60,000 of them at the Stade de France. And that's one of the reasons why I was most disappointed with the quarter-final exit, is because the Irish fans were absolutely incredible. and there was a certain something that was lost when that team exited the tournament. But when you look back at that game, you kind of look back at it now, South Africa being world champions and Ireland knocked out in the quarter-final, you look at it with fresh eyes, and you kind of think, whilst both teams were trying to win, and don't get me wrong, South Africa were absolutely trying to win that game, make no mistake. However, it feels like they were happier to lose it than Ireland would have been. Because, I guess that's partly because Ireland still had to play Scotland and South Africa had already beaten Scotland, but also South Africa were trying a few things out in that game. The 7-1 bench split for a start, which made another appearance in a World Cup final. There were players that played in that game for South Africa who didn't play at all in the knockout stages for South Africa. Whereas Ireland went full bore in that game and in every game. And I think the reality that we probably have to confront, and again, hindsight is always 20/20, is that maybe, and I think South Africa recognise this, the World Cup really begins at the quarter-final stage. And maybe Ireland went too hard too soon. And they picked all of their big guns for all of the games. And South Africa, by comparison, like I say, some players played against Ireland who didn't feature in the knockout stages at all. And South Africa picked their team for the knockout stages and they stuck with it all the way through, pretty much, except for the odd change. Certainly in the pack, they picked their pack and stuck with it. And all they did, from quarter-final, they had 5 forwards on the bench. In the semi-final, they had 6 forwards on the bench. And in the final, they had 7 forwards on the bench. Almost like they were saying, right, World Cup begins now at the quarter-final stage, and we know our players are going to get gradually more fatigued, so we need an extra forward on the bench each game, and it worked for them. Whereas Ireland, and it's easy to say in retrospect, Johnny Sexton was absolutely gassed in that quarter-final against New Zealand, wasn't he? The last quarter of the game, he was out on his feet. I mean, he went out on his shield, an absolute warrior, what a player. But would Andy Farrell do things differently if he could go back? Would he pull a couple of those Irish players out of the front line in a couple of those earlier games? It's easy to say now, but I think probably that would be the assessment. And it would be interesting to see what happens in 4 years' time. I'm sure that lesson will be learnt. So that management of game minutes is something that was an issue, and I think the reality is tournament rugby is different. And you think about that New Zealand game, and Ireland's line-out malfunctioned a bit. Ireland kicked for the corner, and I love the fact they stuck to the principles that got them to the world #1 spot and won them all those games in the build-up to the World Cup. But now you look back at it, was it a slight folly to just keep doing what they do in knockout rugby? Or does there need to be an acknowledgement that maybe knockout rugby is a little bit different? And again, the world champion South Africa, they went from Manie Libbok to Handré Pollard almost to acknowledge tournament rugby is a little bit different. And again, I wonder if they had their time over, or in 4 years' time, will Ireland use that lesson and change things? That said, I mean, the margins are so thin. It was, if Ronan Kelleher gets this ball down from that driving maul, I mean, that moment's going to haunt him, isn't it? And but he gets it down and he's a hero. Did he break off a little bit too early? Maybe. But then Geordie Barrett is just a world-class moment. And those are the margins. Ireland did not choke. There's no question. They did not choke. But they also didn't deliver when it absolutely mattered. And for that reason, I would grade them a 7 out of 10. The pool stages, I would have graded Ireland a 9. 9, maybe even a 10. They were incredible. But it's only with hindsight you can look back and go, key things didn't go right. They may do some things differently. But hey, look, it would be harsh to grade them any lower than a 7. A real solid 7, a fantastic few years. The joy they've given the Irish fans with Grand Slams and I'm even looking at, and I kind of want to go to Ireland's tour to South Africa next year. I'm not a South African fan, I'm not an Irish fan, but I respect both teams massively. And I know that very soon, because of this World League, which I'm pretty cynical about, we're not going to get the tours that we have done in the past. And having seen how good it must have been being an Irish fan in New Zealand when they toured there, I kind of want to go and experience it. So I may well find myself in South Africa next summer to go and watch that one. That's how much I think about this Irish team and the South African team. But when I look at the future, I think the future is very, very bright. What do Ireland need to do? Well, they need to build their squad depth. Again, just to draw the parallel with South Africa, Lukhanyo Am is out injured. Jesse Creel steps up and does a brilliant job. And they've even got Kane and Moody in reserve that could play well in that position. Gary Ringrose, along with Lucanio Am, the other best outside centre in the world, something happened to him. Ireland were in a heap of trouble, and as a result, they played him a lot. And the same goes for Johnny Sexton, who obviously they have to find a replacement for. I'm quite optimistic about Jack Crowley and what he can do. I would also say when I look at Ireland in terms of personnel, I wonder, should Andrew Porter shift across to the tight head prop side? When he emerged as a youngster, and I live in Manchester, and I went to, and in fact I worked on the World Under-20 Championships in 2016 in Manchester. And you can listen back to the podcast because it's been going for 10 years now. So you can hear me raving about Andrew Porter back in 2016. What a player he was. And he was on the tight head prop side. He's done incredibly well to shift to the loose head prop, but could he maybe move back to tight head? Both of Ireland's two tight heads, Beelum and Furlong, are getting a bit older, and I know they've got really good loose heads coming through. That might be one to think about. And generally building the depth of the squad. I would also say, do they need express pace with someone like Robert Balakoon at Ulster? How could he be developed, and some of the areas of his game that need a bit of work? What could be done in the next few years? And that's not to knock Hansen and Lowe, who have been incredible, but you need that squad depth. You've got to replace legends like Keith Earls. And also when you look at Kurtley Arendse and Cheslin Colby and Damien Penaud and Mark Telea, the other top sides have real sprinter express pace. And could Robbie Balakoon be that guy potentially, just to add another layer to an already brilliant Ireland team? And the final thing I'd say is, while you have him, use Jacques Nienaber's brain. It's a coup for Leinster to have him as an assistant coach, having just won a World Cup for South Africa. And from what Jacques Nienaber's saying, his work with South Africa may not be done. Maybe he'll go back to them before the next World Cup. If that is the case, use this guy's brain as much as you can. And I'm sure the Irish rugby system will be getting the very most that they can out of a wonderful rugby brain that Jacques Nienaber has. But overall, love where Irish rugby's at. The juggernaut's going to keep going on. They're going to keep dominating Northern Hemisphere rugby along with France for years to come, because their youth systems, their under-20s teams, their provinces, their coaching setups are all in such a good place. This is, what's that phrase? It's always darkest before the dawn. It feels like it may be that for Ireland right now. It will hurt, it will sting, but I think this could be a defining moment, and the future is very, very bright, and I wouldn't be surprised if lessons are learned and we get an even better Ireland at the next World Cup, who could achieve what seems like the impossible right now. I'll see you on the next video. I've got more videos for the other top teams coming very soon, so please hit subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, leave your comments. I'll see you on the next one.